Roman art of the Republic dates from approximately 509 BC, with the legendary founding of the Republic, to around 44 BC. It encompasses a broad spectrum of media, but I'm going to concentrate on three areas: Roman portrait busts, fresco wall paintings discovered in Pompeii and the surrounding areas, and architecture. As events unfolded over the centuries, we can try to understand how the religious beliefs, politics, and culture impacted the developments in art and architecture. Every great civilization presents a unique personality, and the image created by that society symbolizes to the world what was most important to them. The development of Roman portrait sculpture, both private and public, is unique in comparison to other ancient cultures. Unique not only because of the quantity of surviving examples, but also because of the range of its treatment of human features. Private portrait sculpture probably originated with funerary customs. Family altars and tombs were adorned with portrait reliefs or busts placed in niches in homes. The long-held tradition of wax portrait masks or imagines were used in funeral processions of the upper classes to commemorate their distinguished ancestry. These masks, along with busts made from bronze, marble, or terracotta, celebrated noted ancestors who held high office or had been awarded special honors, while also honoring their deceased relatives. It is thought that the special nature of these wax death masks that detailed facial characteristics among older Romans may have influenced the style of portrait sculpture. In the Republic, public sculpture honored political officials and military commanders whose achievements were noted by their peers. Lucius Junius Brutus, the founder of the Republic and said to be its first consul, embodied its ideals. This is a finely detailed, realistic portrait of a powerful leader. In the life-size bronze statue of Aulus Metellus, we see a naturalistic portrait of an orator, with his upraised arm gesturing to the public. He wears the clothing of a magistrate, a toga and high boots. On the hem of his toga is a dedicatory inscription detailing his name and notable ancestors. To the Romans, ancestry was the best indicator of a man's ability and success. The intense political rivalry of the late Republican period gave even greater meaning to the display of one's lineage and emphasized the tradition of the cursus, or inscriptions, wax imagines, and funerary processions as an essential factor for success. In the Republic, the most highly valued traits included a devotion to public service, duty, and military prowess, and so Republican citizens sought to display these ideals in their portraits. This bust of Scipio Africanus, the great military hero, conveys intensity and intelligence, along with a realistic depiction of his age. Public officials commissioned portrait busts that reflected every wrinkle and imperfection of the face. Unlike the idealized statues of Hellenic Greece, which emphasized physical beauty and perfection, the Romans preferred maturity over youth, the experience and wisdom of age, and a naturalistic style which became known as veristic. An almost hyper-realism prevailed, which, as mentioned earlier, may have had its origins in the wax masks of ancestors. The Torlonia bust is typical of this style, with its furrowed brow, deep facial lines, and a sense of seriousness or gravitas. It's said to be a portrait of Cato the Elder. Portrait sculpture lets us see a wide range of individuals that reflects the variety of the Roman population. This is why it is considered one of the most realistic examples of the genre in the history of art. It includes patricians and senators, old men, such as this portrait bust here, ordinary Romans, and freedmen, soldiers, and generals. The grave relief of Publius Aetius and his wife Aedia were two freed slaves, depicted in the same style as that of their patrician servants. It is interesting to note that their name is written below that of their master, and their social class is never in doubt. This is a portrait of Julius Caesar, one of the few made during his lifetime, called the Tusculum bust. On the left is a more recently discovered bust, also claimed to be that of Caesar, discovered in 2007 in the Rhone River near Arles in France. Although portraits survive in great numbers, there are few names of Roman artists recorded. In general, Roman art was designed to serve the needs of its patrons, rather than to express the artistic temperaments of its makers. It is rare that paintings from antiquity survive. This is because paint is so much more fragile a medium than stone or bronze sculpture. It is largely thanks to the ancient towns of Pompeii and Herculaneum around the Bay of Naples that we have learned so much about the history of Roman wall painting. When those cities were buried under volcanic ash in 79 AD, after the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, the astonishing treasures hidden within only became known to the world in the 18th century. A man named August Mau, a 19th century German scholar, originally classified 4 styles of Pompeian wall painting. Only the first 2 belong within the Republican period. Although these styles are not just confined to Pompeii and can be found in Rome and the provinces, Pompeii contains the largest sources for the periods. The wall paintings were true frescoes, meaning the pigment was applied to wet plaster on the wall. Although this can be a durable technique, usually the colors fade when exposed to light and air. As so often happens in archaeology, the disaster of Vesuvius and Pompeii allowed excavators a rare window into the life of the city's ancient inhabitants and how wealthy Romans lived at this time. Mau called the first Pompeian style from 200 to 80 BC the incrustation or masonry style, and believed its origins lay in Hellenic Greece of the 4th to 3rd century BC in painting and architecture. In order to simulate masonry and costly building materials such as marble, the Romans created a faux marble technique, coupled with stucco moldings to produce a somewhat three-dimensional effect. As ordinary Romans, no matter how wealthy, could not compete with official displays of marble in a variety of colors, they decorated their homes with painted imitations of these luxury stones. Skilled painters rendered large slabs on the walls that were almost as impressive as the real thing. The decline of the first style coincided with the Roman colonization of Pompeii in 80 BC, which transformed what had been mostly an Italic town with Greek influences into a Roman city. Advancing beyond the simple representation of expensive building materials, artists began showing more complex scenes of architecture, landscapes, and figures. Mau called this second style the architectural or illusionary style, and was first seen in Pompeii around 80 BC and popular until about the end of the 1st century BC. It still used elements of the first style, such as faux marble blocks along the base of the walls. While the first style emphasized the flatness of the walls, the second style sought to open up the wall with architectural vistas and create the illusion of depth. This technique is called trompe-l'œil, or trick of the eye. The paintings often counteracted the claustrophobic nature of windowless rooms in Roman houses. In one of the most exceptional examples of the second style is the bedroom or cubiculum belonging to P. Fannius Sinistor from 50 BC at Bosco Real, just outside Pompeii. It has been reconstructed within the Met Museum in New York City. In constantly shifting perspectives, our eyes move from balconies, fountains, along colonnades, up through columns, statues, and to the sky beyond. The beauty of the colors, classical allusions, and execution of the details all reflect the sophistication of painting. This is a view of the three walls in the room. Some of the best evidence for the techniques of Roman wall painting is in the works of the Roman architect Vitruvius, whose 10-volume work De Architectura, written in 27 BC, describes the elaborate methods used by wall painters, mentioning the inclusion of lead sheets in the walls to prevent moisture from attacking the fresco, the preparation of as many as 7 layers of plaster on the wall, and the use of marble powder in the top layers to produce a mirror-like sheen on the surface. Vitruvius also describes the complex preparation of colors used, among which the deepest shade of purple was by far the most precious and costly color, as it was usually obtained from sea whelks or snails. This would explain why the purple stripe on senators' togas was so prestigious and why purple came to be associated with royalty. As in sculpture, the names of these artists remains largely unknown to us, and it is those who commissioned their work whose names we know. Roman architecture, even more than Roman art, reflected the practical character, great energy, and organizational skill of its creators. As Rome expanded during the Republic and later, Roman architects struggled to achieve two all-important aims: to show the power and grandeur of Rome, and to improve the lives of its citizens. To this end, they mastered a number of architectural techniques: the arch, the vault, and the dome, and the use of concrete. Employing these techniques allowed Roman architects to design some of the greatest public buildings in the history of architecture, including temples, amphitheaters, and public baths. To maintain order and efficiency, Roman architects also designed aqueducts, drainage systems, bridges, and roads. Villas of great beauty were created for the wealthy, and in increasingly large urban centers, multi-story apartment houses were built for poorer citizens. Roman architects learned a great deal from Etruscan art and design and had huge respect for Greek architecture and sculpture, but they never hesitated to assimilate or copy what was needed to accomplish their own goals. Although many of the greatest buildings erected by the Romans were from the age of empire, such as the Pont du Gard aqueduct in Nîmes, France, and the Colosseum and the Pantheon in Rome, the origins for these structures evolved during the years of the Republic. If grandeur became Rome's ultimate goal and led to these incredible works of engineering and building, the early influences of Etruscan and Greek architecture and decoration were somewhat more modest. As Rome's oldest temples indicate something of Greek harmony and simplicity, they are eventually set among basilicas and arched constructions of greater complexity and size. In architecture, the Romans absorbed some important techniques from the Etruscans before Greek influence became decisive. This included the arch and the vault, which ultimately carried Roman engineering away from the ancient Greeks, who used a post and lintel building method, which was basically two upright posts, like columns, with a horizontal block or lintel laid flat across the top. As they mastered these techniques, they surpassed the Greeks and moved in a new direction. The vaulting techniques used by the Romans included a semicircular or barrel vault and the groin vault, or two intersecting barrel vaults. The surfaces were then covered in stucco or tile. A natural development of the vault was the dome, which allowed the construction of vaulted ceilings and the roofing of large enclosed spaces. The mastery of Roman architects of the arch, the vault, and the dome was further enhanced by the development of concrete. This allowed them to create large interior spaces that could be roofed successfully. Roofing a great area requires carrying heavy materials across spaces impossible to cover with the Greeks' post and lintel system. In the arch and the vault, the Romans found a way to support massive weight and create majestic buildings. Although limited by the use of post and lintel buildings, the Greeks mainly influenced the Romans in matters of style and decoration. This was most obvious in the three orders of Greek architecture: the Doric column, which was the most plain, the Ionic, and the Corinthian, which was the most decorative. To this, the Romans added two more styles, the Tuscan and the Composite. In general, the Romans preferred to use the most elaborate Corinthian order, but also used the Ionic. They also modified the columns by making them slimmer and more ornamental. The continued use of columns on Roman buildings gave them a classical appearance. Overall, the architects were Roman or Etruscans, and the sculptors and painters were Greek. And it seems that architects did all the important engineering and construction work, and then handed the decorative work over to the imported artists. Over time, with much, if not all, of the decoration gone, what remains is the essential grandeur of the buildings. Roman mastery of concrete was the key to the step forward. Its strength, low cost, flexibility, and convenience, compared to other materials, made it easier to build the arch and the vault. It was first used around 273 BC, and its widespread use was a major event in the Roman architectural revolution. It freed construction from the restrictions of stone and brick, and permitted new and bigger designs. Laid in the shape of arches and vaults, it hardened into a rigid mass capable of bearing the weight and stresses that bothered builders using brick or stone. In fact, it is the widespread use of concrete in many Roman structures that has enabled them to survive to the present, and why there are fewer surviving Republican structures prior to the use of concrete. So what was Roman concrete? Opus caementicium, as it was called, was made from a mixture of lime mortar, sand, and volcanic sand, or pozzolana, which set well even under water. Then brick and other rubble was added. Another unusual addition was horsehair, which evidently made concrete less likely to crack. And then animal blood was added, which increased resistance to frost, after which concrete walls were faced. During the Republic, there were two types of facing: opus quadratum, a type of stone walling used on important public buildings, and opus incertum, the most popular facing for ordinary concrete walls prior to the Empire, which was uncut stones randomly placed in the concrete. The earliest buildings around Rome were made of wood and tufa, a type of local limestone that could be worked with bronze tools. Later, harder stones were used. Much later, travertine, a form of limestone, was used. Marble was used only for facing or decoration. Republicans generally considered it too luxurious for widespread use. Let's take a look at some of the early temples in the Republic and how they progressed. The Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, built in the late 6th century BC, sits high on the Capitoline Hill. It was the most important temple in ancient Rome and also the oldest large temple in Rome. It bears many hallmarks of Etruscan architecture. It was erected from local tufa and sits on a high podium reached by several steps. It is approached from the front only, unlike Greek temples, which one could walk all around. The porch is very deep, and it had 3 cellas or cult rooms, which was unique. It was constructed on the post and lintel design. The Temple of Jupiter would remain influential in temple design for much of the Republic. It was commissioned by Tarquinius Superbus, the last king of Rome. He set the precedent for later Romans that they were expected to commission art and architecture for the city. The Temple of Portunus, the god of livestock, is one of the best preserved, most beautiful early temples in Rome, originally built in the 4th century BC and then rebuilt in 120 BC. Similar to the Temple of Jupiter, it's a rectangular building of the Ionic order on a raised podium with 4 columns across the porch. Built of tufa and travertine, it's faced with stucco. It owes its state of preservation from being converted into a church in the 9th century. It stands in the ancient Forum Boarium, the cattle market, which was an important commercial center near the Tiber River. The Temple of Hercules Victor is also in the Forum Boarium. Dating from the late 2nd century BC, it is thought to be erected by Mummius Archicus, the destroyer of Corinth. It's an exquisite round temple of Greek design, encircled by a colonnade of 20 Corinthian columns. The temple is the earliest surviving marble temple built in Rome. It too was converted into a church in 1132. The sanctuary of Fortuna Primigenia at Palestrina, about 23 miles southeast of Rome, was built at the end of the 2nd century BC and is one of the best early examples of the use of concrete building on a grand scale. This sacred complex dedicated to the goddess Fortuna includes 7 terraces, long ramps with connecting stairs, arches and colonnades built on 4 levels. At the top, cut into the rock, is the temple. It was only discovered after the end of the Second World War when the city was being dug out from under the rubble of extensive bombing. One of the earliest surviving domes built during the Republic is in the Stabian Baths of Pompeii from around 80 BC. Probably the most popular buildings among all classes of citizens were the public baths, which by the end of the Republic were a regular feature of Roman life. This dome was found in the Frigidarium, or cold room. Later imperial baths became vast domed structures with luxurious decorations, such as the Roman baths of Caracalla. The oldest surviving amphitheater built in stone is also from Pompeii, built around 80 BC. These were large circular or oval outdoor arenas where public spectacles were held. This arena held 20,000 spectators and had a reinforced concrete ring built into the exterior walls. It was the model for all future amphitheaters. The next great amphitheater was the Roman Colosseum, built in 80 AD. Finally, Pompey's Theater, from 55 BC, was built in the Campus Martius outside the walls of Rome because a stone theater was forbidden inside the city. He paid for the theater himself with the spoils of war. It was built as a political statement to raise his status as a general and consul and memorialize his career. The complex consists of a theater, a temple to Venus Victrix, gardens, fountains, an arcade which housed his art collection on public display, and a curia, or meeting hall, used by the Senate. Built of concrete and stone and faced with marble, it became the model for all future theaters in the empire. It also serves as an important transitional monument between the Republican tradition of temple construction and the imperial period. It was in front of the Curia Pompeia that Julius Caesar was assassinated. If we view the Roman character as a blend between the great respect for traditional values of religious observation and civic duty, we see how early architecture served these needs. However, as the Republic adapted to political and military demands, so did architecture reflect these needs. Great roads were built, aqueducts were required to bring in more water to cities, so they too were introduced. Temples not only reflected the glory of the gods, but increasingly that of powerful military leaders and their victories over the conquered. Forums and basilicas, Political and commercial centers of the city were built, and amphitheaters and large public baths provided entertainment and social venues for all classes. Architecture provided these solutions. The Roman genius for adapting to these challenges with many significant, new, and increasingly grandiose structures was their greatest gift to the history of art.